because the scheduled live didn't work and we've had internet problems for the last 2 days. So we weren't really able to test this the way that we would like to. But Steve is going to come in here and both of us are going to share the phone and be super cozy. And we will start talking about our debate about ways that astrology might possibly work. And we'll hopefully figure out the technological issues next time.
Hopefully.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. I can move this a little bit closer. Okay, welcome to Spiritsaid. Today we're talking about 8 ways that astrology might possibly work. And I was talking to my spirit guides earlier today, and they basically were like, well, you should talk about why you think astrology works before you start theorizing about the possible causes. So I will say that Steve and I, when we got going, were both sort of skeptical. Neither one of us really thought that astrology, hello, Roots and Waves, we see you here, great to see you. Oh, hey, more intuitive me, that's Elizabeth and Ange. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Our last live stream somehow sort of collapsed, so I'm really glad to see you here. And I was just saying that Steve and I were both sort of skeptical when we first got into astrology. Neither one of us thought it would work. And we both sort of came from groups of people who didn't think it was going to work either. So before diving into like why astrology might possibly work, I thought we should talk a little bit, actually my spirit guide said, we should talk a little bit about why we even think it works at all. And so what happened to me was when I started, so I was part of this Christian church, which we were part of together for 20 years. That's where we met. And I sort of had a spiritual awakening, and I started hearing from, voices and divine voices. And I just didn't feel like I belonged in that environment anymore. People weren't the most welcoming, and they were sort of skeptical. And then I got into alt spirituality because I was like, well, there's got to be some place where it's okay to hear from voices and you can, channel and connect with the divine. And I got guided to this astrology group, and the lady there was very lovely about letting people practice. And so I was like, well, I'll practice. And I started doing readings, which they weren't even really readings. It was just me like sort of mimicking what I saw her doing and talking about people's charts. And people were like, ah, that's amazing. Nobody's ever read my chart like that. Can I pay you to do this? And I was like, I started this like 2 weeks ago. But it was clear to me that I was like learning things very quickly. And then I sort of got into the idea of making prediction, which I first rejected because of course I reject every good idea. But then I started doing it and I started making these predictions that came true. And there are a lot of ideas about how astrology is, well, you're just reading people, or you're very intuitive, or people are sort of impressionable and they just agree with you. Oh, hey, we have more people. Yeah. So I'm talking about why I became to believe that astrology was even true. But then I started making predictions that weren't about people. They were about events or things that would happen. And those came true too. And I'm like, okay, well, there's something going on here, because this is now just beyond like, well, people are impressionable, or, oh, you're just doing cold readings. Do you want to say what convinced you that astrology was real, honey?
Sure. Okay. So
this is my husband, Steve, and I'm Robin Poole, for those of you who don't know.
Right.
This is Robin and Steve.
Nice to meet all of you out there.
Okay.
Right. So as Robin said, we met in church. I grew up kind of in a religious, no, that's kind of an understatement. I grew up in a very religious family. Both sides, mother, father, ministers, missionaries, everything. And I had a thorough grounding in biblical teaching. Probably read the Bible all the way through before I was 7 years old. But, as I grew older, I got to see kind of more of the wider world, particularly because I got, at the encouragement of my mom, in school, got involved in art and music. So those are things that don't necessarily restrict, they expand. And I just got very kind of curious and interested in things that I hadn't seen and done before. That being said, I also kind of had this very logical side, this very practical side. If you look at my astrology chart, my Mars sits right on the 6th house of work, which is where it really kind of wants to be, but it's very much do and go, and it doesn't necessarily lead one to, I'll use the phrase suffer fools lightly. So I believe in science, I believe in empiricism, I have a degree in accounting, I learned how to program computers, in addition to being artist and things like that. So I wasn't and I had this religious background, so I wasn't somebody who had any kind of predisposition for embracing astrology. And the thing is, when Robin started doing this, I was very much kind of, I support this, but from a distance. Yeah. Like it's good for Robin to do this, which I've since learned is not the take I should have taken, but life is live and learn. And I don't know, at some point you offered to do a reading for me because you were practicing.
Right.
And I'm like, sure, let's do it. And you drew up this chart, and I swear this chart was me. It was me. And I'm like, I saw you do it. I knew I saw how you were doing it. So I couldn't just say, oh, that's because you know me. It's like, no, the chart knows you. So over the next couple of years, as I watched Robin grow and her astrology knowledge and practice, and then she discovered William Lilly, who was doing predictive astrology, and she started doing predictive astrology. She did predictive astrology with her parents on a trip, and she was spot dead on about something that she should not have been spot dead on about. Like, there's just like, and so basically kind of like, because of this just propensity for Robin to demonstrate these abilities in ways that were relatable, but also like accurate. You spend enough, so what I tell people is you spend enough time with Robin, you too will believe.
Yeah. Yeah, so my mother's a professor of astronomy and astrophysics, and my dad is a lawyer. So we come from these, super rationalistic and scientific backgrounds. But it's sort of like it goes beyond coincidence at some point. You start making predictions about people you don't know, that you can't even see, and you're not reading, and they all end up coming true. So that's why we think astrology is true. And I think we're going to do a later live on like objections to astrology and why we've decided that those aren't necessarily true. I'll mention I'm a Virgo sun, Steve is a Cancer sun. Welcome to the Aquarius, welcome to the Aries. We're really glad to have you guys here. So there are basically two schools for how astrology could possibly work. And one is that astrology is an activator, which means it's actually like causing what happens. So somehow there are energies from the planets that affect us, even though they're very far away, and it sort of pushes forward the events that astrology predicts. And then the other is that astrology is an indicator, and it's more like the clock on the wall. It's like a sign of what's happening, but it isn't actually what is actually happening. So it doesn't push the events forward, but that you can use it to actually indicate what the events are. And if you know how to read it, then you can predict what's going to happen in the future. So we've thought of quite a few ways in which the indicator and the activator ideas might work. And I think we'll just dive into those and see what we think. Okay, so Steve's first idea was an indicator idea.
Yes.
And you want to say what it is?
Well, and so before I do, I have a little disclaimer. These are just our opinions. We're not claiming that this is what they are. We're just thinking that could be. So, I know some people online like to argue, and we don't want to argue. So if you want to argue about it, please don't. But, please consider what we're saying and think, maybe.
I kind of like arguing. I'll just say that. Also, if you have questions and you want to stick them in the chat because you want to address that, feel free. Okay,
all right.
What's your idea, honey?
So the idea that I think most resonates with me is the idea that what happens astrologically happens because the Earth, the solar system, the universe has these kinds of rhythms built into them, and they're built into all levels, from quarks up to electrons, up to simple organisms, up to complex organisms, up to complex structures like oceans and weather and solar winds, and all the way out. There are these kinds of rhythms to things. It's like we exist because there's order to the universe, and the order requires some kind of rule. So I think the thing that I thought about was Robin started talking. I don't know. Can I talk about Schumann resonance?
Yes,
again?
you can talk about
so
Schumann
Robin
resonances.
started talking about this thing that she heard from her friend Elizabeth about Schumann resonances. Like the Earth has a kind of a hum. That's what I guess I will say, at multiple frequencies. And I can see that. Like, logically, that could make sense. And if those frequencies are trigger moments for astrological events, like what we perceive as astrological events, right? So you resonate at this certain frequency for this reason, this sort of thing happens, this change happens. That could make sense to me. And that it is consistent, like the barium particle, which is the atomic particle that like spins like a quark, and that's what they use for atomic clocks, right? That's how we keep accurate time, because it beats at the same rate all the time. And if these resonances happen in sync with what we see up in the sky, then the sky becomes an indicator, because whenever you see this come around, you'll know that in this vibration, you've got this sort of thing going on.
Yeah. So we labeled this like the harmonic resonance theory, right? That there's like these harmonies on Earth, energies on Earth, and energies in the cosmos, and they sort of resonate together. And the notes that I took for that are like they're vibrational waves, and it's sort of like a coincidence that the planets resonate at this frequency, and so do we. Steve said it was part of our code, and it was baked in at birth.
Yeah, part of the operating system.
Right, okay. So the analogy I came up with is it's like if you drop a pebble into a bucket, it makes ripples. But if you drop a boulder into a pond, it makes the same ripples, just on a much larger scale. Okay, so harmonic resonance theory, that's number one. All right, now I'm going to do an activator theory, right? So my theory is that actually there are energies that the planets have that affect us in a subliminal sort of way. So we know this is true for humans. Like, for example, humans can be poisoned by radiation without really realizing it. So there's an effect of the radioactive particles on our systems, even though our five senses don't register that. And I have a hunch that there are actually energies from the planets that affect us that are not diminished by time and space. Because a lot of people say, well, the planets are the sun's 93 million miles away, and a lot of the planets are farther than that. How could anything affect us from that far away? And it's like, well, there are always instances of humans who are affected by things over a wide degree of time and space. So when Steve and I were flying to Oregon, his mother, it's not quite a trigger warning. We're talking about the passing of his mom, so I'll just let you know. His mother was sort of nearing the end, and we were flying to Oregon to say goodbye. And we were flying from North Carolina. The plane touches down, and we look at each other and we're like, oh my gosh, she's gone. And then we found out later that actually that was the exact moment that she passed away. So even though we were hundreds of miles or thousands of miles away, we were still connected with her energetically. And I think that's what's going on with the planets. Now, there are a lot of forces in the universe that nobody knew about until humans built a detector for them, like radio waves. So radio waves emanate from the galactic center. They've been doing that for millions or maybe billions of years. But until human beings built a radio, we had no idea they were there. And I think that's what's going on with astrology. I think there's planetary energies we can't sense, and they affect us. Okay, but that's not the only idea, because we came up with another theory, and that is, I loved this. This was Steve's idea, right? So the theory was that the planets are an indicator of a future that already exists.
Okay, right. Now, and this is one of those things, again, somebody's going to be like, that's not how this works. Okay, well, I'm not a physicist, so pardon me. But there are theories about the nature of time. that suggests that time exists all at once. So like that movie that got the Oscar a couple years back, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Yeah, that's what we're calling this, the theory. That's the name of this theory.
And it's like the past is has happened, is happening, and will happen. Just as the future has happened, will happen, and is happening.
Elizabeth says, "Oh yes, I love that movie. Yeah, that was influential on our thinking for this theory." For sure.
So it can. So if somehow there's a if somehow there's some sort of method for recording, like timing. I guess I'll go back to this timing idea. This happens in sync with this thing. Like, is it really like predicting the future if the future's already happened?
Yeah. So we're discussing, for those of you who've joined, I see some new people here. We're discussing possible theories for how astrology could work. And this is the everything, everywhere, all at once theory, which says that the future already exists and astrology is like a predictor or an indicator of that. Yeah. Okay. So the future already exists. And
so if you can see that whole map, it's like looking at a map of the road. You can see that in 200 miles, the road turns to the left. You can say, hey, in 200 miles, we're turning to the left. And it's no big magic trick because you already saw it.
Yeah. So Steve described this when we were talking about this analogy as this is like a parenting book. So like the parenting book is already going to predict how your kid is going to act. They're going to cry over this. They're going to be frustrated about this. They'll be defiant about that. And astrology is like a giant book that just sort of tells you what is going to happen in the future because all of the futures already exist because time is not linear. So I'll just take a moment and say hi to Ollie, hi to Clevis, hi to all of these people. Hello, beautiful people who have joined us.
Now, I will say that the first theory I gave feels more real, more graspable than the second theory. Mm-hmm. And I am definitely not advocating that everything exists everywhere all at once. But as a theory, it's an attractive one.
Okay, perfect. Okay, now we're going to, and feel free, by the way, if you guys have any questions, to put those in the chat. We'll be happy to answer them. Thank you to the person who said they loved our videos. Really appreciate that. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the divination theory. So this is astrology works by divination, which is to say that there are movements of the planets through the sky. There are movements of the birds flying across the earth. There are movements of your tarot cards. There are movements of your runes. And anybody who does divination seriously knows that the human psyche, maybe with some help from spirit guides, is able to pick out patterns and symbols from these movements. So like you can pull a tarot card back to back for two clients, the same card, and get something completely different out of it because you're going to tap into your intuition for what's best for them. So there's an idea that astrology actually isn't causal because the planets aren't affecting us so much as it's a series of symbols that we are interpreting. And then if you are in touch with your intuition and your spirit guides, you manage to get the right information. Now, I think this is actually a reasonable interpretation for the sort of like psychological astrology that we do, where we talk about a person's personality or we give them advice on their relationships. I'm a little skeptical on this one, though, when it comes to like, how do we predict a flood, right? Or like I at one point predicted I would find a vintage sweater in a certain location in a certain color on a certain time period in a certain place, and that all turned out to be true. So the divination thing...
She still has that sweater.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very possible when you're reading a person. I'm less sure, but maybe spirit guides are helping us and we're just coming up with good things for divination. Okay, so that's I guess theory number 4. It's divination. We got It's harmonics. It's divination, it's the future that already exists, it's untold planetary energies that we haven't sensed yet. Okay. All right. Theory number 5 was, where's the other one? That there are planetary spirits that help us out. So this is a causal theory, but it's not necessarily like the planets themselves are causing it. So those of you who've, connected with nature may have had the sense that like this tree feels so benevolent, right? Or if you have a pet, the pet is like, oh, my cat loves me so much. I feel like my cat is my wise guide. well, maybe the planets have these loving spirits as well. It's not just the physical body of Jupiter going through the sky, but there's actually like a spirit of Jupiter that whispers to us in wise ways, or like puts our point, like points us in the right direction, or tells us what we should be predicting. So it's almost like it's not really a physical body with a physical energy that affects us. It's more like a spiritual body with a spiritual energy, which explains why astrologers can be so much better if they tap into their spirit team or they're working on their spirit intuition. So I see the chat going by and everybody's saying hi, which is lovely. I'm kind of interested in, what do you guys think about these theories? Does any of them seem like more plausible to you, or
Do any sound like theories you hope are true?
Yeah, oh, that was big. I should say that. I really wanted the theory of the like loving planetary spirit to be true. And then I was like afraid, because I was like, oh no, what if it's not true? But my spirit guides told me that we're not here to say what's true. We're just here to suggest some interesting possibilities. Yeah.
The other one that I was thinking of, that I was reminded of, which is a fun one, I think, it's fun for me, is the idea that it's a matrix world we live in.
Oh, right.
So this is kind of interesting. There are physicists, again, who posit that the nature of electrons and really small particles share a lot of common traits with pixels on a computer screen. And that real life may be actually the equivalent of virtual. And that what we are is numbers and ones and zeros, the equivalent of that, running through some code. And if the universe has that kind of a code, then it's super easy for the code generation to either purposefully or accidentally make things happen that you don't expect, right? So like if you ever saw the movie The Matrix and they first explained what deja vu was, it's like they had the example of the cat that was there and disappeared and then reappeared again. And so astrology may be like the pattern reading of those movements of events.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of interesting that our discussion of how astrology might work is like informed by movies like The Matrix.
Yeah.
Right? Like this
Well,
is.
I am a sci-fi writer, so yeah. Most of my references are either sci-fi, fantasy movies, or The Simpsons.
Right. Yeah. Well, the reason I'm saying that, though, is that I was doing some research about reasons in the past that people thought astrology worked. And the oldest written evidence of Western style astrology, so I'm not an expert on astrology from Asia or South America or any of those places, but the oldest astrology that we have for the 12 sign zodiac goes back to the Babylonians. And they thought that the stars were messages from the gods. So, and I see that comment. I feel like life is a hologram, which is a really interesting question about how astrology might work if life is a hologram. So anyway, so they thought that the movements of the planets were messages sent by the helpful and benevolent gods to explain what was going to happen. It was like a warning of a flood or a warning of danger to the king. And then the idea was that if you were an astrologer and you were learned, you could figure out how to read those omens and then you could take some action. So in fact, if they interpreted that danger to the king was coming up, they would actually remove the king and they would put in a substitute king who was like a condemned criminal or somebody who was going to, be imprisoned. And then if that person survived and the danger didn't manifest, they would be set free or receive a pardon. And then they would put the king back on the actual throne. So they thought that they were messages from divine figures to help us live a more secure and enjoyable life. So they didn't debate about how astrology worked because for them the divinity aspect was like a perfectly reasonable explanation. And then the interesting thing is that sort of fell away, as far as I can tell, when astrology came into the Greek world. And then people started debating about how it would work and how can something so far away affect us. So this debate has actually been going on for at least a couple thousand years that we understand. But the reason I mention that is that they didn't have all of these like sci-fi imaginative movies and things like that. And
or
so,
actual physics and telescopes and
right, they couldn't observe the actual planets. We're going to talk about that. Like, how did they get so much information about the planets, right, without really observing them? But yeah, but it's like we have so many um, more abilities and techniques than they had that I'm actually kind of hopeful. Like at some point, we did build a radio detector and detect radio waves, so I'm hopeful that we can get this astrology thing going. So, but the life as a hologram is another example. Holograms are sort of a modern invention, and now we're thinking that maybe life feels like something that seems like it exists in a certain way and then doesn't really. So, this gets to another theory, which is that the planets are somehow affecting our human biological systems. And this was suggested by a family member of mine. And this person said, well, we know that the moon's gravity acts on the like tidal systems. Oh, thank you, Ollie. I appreciate that you like to learn about the history. I always wonder how much history I should put in. So thank you for saying that you appreciate that. Yeah.
super Virgo.
Right. It's true. I do love
Lots
history.
and lots and lots of useful information.
Yeah. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. Oh yeah, right. So she says, well, we know that the moon's gravity acts on fluids on the Earth, right? It creates tidal bulges. And there's some anecdotal evidence that maybe it affects people's moods. Like sometimes people say that there are more emergency room visits during the full moon. Other people say that maybe that's not so true. So her theory was that the moon is acting also on the fluids in the human body, like the blood. Yes, Virgo loves Virgo. Like the blood or the amniotic fluids, during pregnancy. And so she had a theory that maybe the planets are somehow affecting our hormonal balances or our blood pressure or something like that, which I think is another kind of cool theory. I mean, I always think back to the history of medicine, yeah, which is mostly that people had no idea really what was going on and made a lot of guesses, some of which were right and some of which were wrong back in the day. But then we discovered microscopes and biochemistry and anatomy got better and dissection became acceptable. And now people understand a lot more about the human body.
I would also say I actually had some actual experience with this recently. We discovered last year on a medical checkup that I was having some issues with hormone levels. And that kind of coincided with a drop in my energy and a drop in my mood. And I was actually complaining to Robin that I was feeling old. Got those fixed. And in addition to that, we were also doing locational astrology. Moved to a better sign, addressed the physical issues, and I'm not saying those things anymore.
It's true. The funny thing, though, and I think this is important for astrology, so I see some comments here about the consciousness and culture is what shapes and provides the backdrop for manifestation, right? So that's like where we are and who we are affects how we see things, which I think is really cool and important, especially because we have to use our imagination a lot to imagine what could be causing these things. And then Roots and Waves says, yes, I think that the planets and multiverse have effects on our body fluids, which in turn affects our cells, which I think is also absolutely true. And one of the interesting things about this is that it feels very real when it's happening to you. So Steve spent a lot of time telling me that he was just getting older. He didn't have enough energy. He wasn't thinking as clearly. And
I was getting migraines.
Yeah, he was getting migraines. And then we got his hormones fixed. And all of a sudden, he no longer says, I'm getting older and I'm tired.
No, I'm as energetic and healthy and strong as I was 15 years ago.
Yeah. So I think that this is very true of astrology as well, because the nice thing about astrology is that we can see when the cycles are changing, right? So we can see that things are going to be difficult with a Mars square for 6 or 7 days, but then things are going to get better later. So I've been going through a Saturn opposition, which has been really hard, but like today is the last day and I'm looking forward to feeling better
You were
tomorrow.
so excited this morning about that.
I was, right. So when we say things like we're shaped by our environment, part of the point of astrology is that it helps you understand how the environment is shaping you. And more importantly, for how long it will be shaping you in this way until the cycle keeps going. So you're no longer thinking, oh, I'm stuck here. I've got to be like this. This is just the way I am. This is something I can't do anything about. And so the person who came up with this theory, this family member who was talking about how the planets affect our physical systems, had an experience where she woke up with this incredible burst of creativity a few days ago. Ooh, I see something. Yes, exactly, Elizabeth. What can we do to help us through those moments, right? Once you understand how you're being affected and how long it's going to last, you can figure out how to make use of those energies. Yeah, exactly. So this family member woke up with this burst of creativity, and then she emailed me and said, can astrology explain this? And I emailed her back with an astrological explanation. This is the first family member who's asked me about my astrology, so I was really just so grateful to her. But it was almost like once it had happened to her and then she saw the astrology, now she's like, oh, I can see that I felt different and my emotions were different. And like for me, I feel a lot of physical pain during some astrological transits. And so it's this idea that somehow these bodies from so far away are either predicting or resonating with or actually affecting the physical systems that we inhabit. And I will just say that a lot of things that in the past I thought I was sick, I thought I was having a physical problem, I thought I was afraid, I thought I was responding to my own environment, and it turned out to be some sort of planetary transit. So one of the reasons we're having these conversations is that I would really like for people to start thinking that maybe astrology is a potential explanation for the physical aches and pains or the highs and lows that we experience. Because I think if we always think, oh, it's psychological, or we always think, oh, it's physical and I have to go to the doctor, we're missing the third option, which is, oh, it's actually a cycle of energy. And what's going to help me is not a visit to the doctor or not delving into my psyche, but rather doing some astrological remediation or having the right things to eat or taking some time off. So it's like if we can
Although if people should go see the doctor for regular checkups. Just throw that in there.
All right.
We are pro Western medicine as well as other things.
That's true. I'll just say I have trouble with this a little bit. Oh, hi, Miriam. Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you for coming. So I have a little bit of problem with Western medicine, to be frank. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying this is me because I was improperly diagnosed with a mental health disorder I didn't have, because I now realize I'm just astrologically very sensitive. And so I'm always like, I think Western medicine is great. And if I broke my arm, I would totally go to the emergency room. But I'm sort of frustrated because Western medicine didn't really help me understand what was going on with my physical body in the way that astrology has helped me understood. So I think Western medicine is great for some sorts of physical ailments, but it's not so great for every type of physical ailment. And unfortunately, it's really the primary modality that a lot of people use in our society. And I would love to elevate astrology to a level of that modality as well, so that people go to the Western medical doctor for regular checkups, and they also go to the astrologer for regular medical checkups. And that way, whatever's wrong with you, there's somebody out there, hopefully, who can help you figure out what it is.
Yeah, it takes a village to stay healthy.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, I have another theory for how astrology works, getting back onto that plan. Yes. It's true. Okay, I agree with you. I'm glad other people out there think that Western medicine is not perfect, but it is great. I just personally...
You know what's great is like dentistry. Dentistry is great.
Anesthetics are great, right? Okay. All right, so back to this other theory. Okay, so here's another theory. Another theory about how astrology might possibly work is that there are sort of like forces of life that exist at many different scales. So we know, for example, that gravity works on very small scales, but it also works on much larger scales. So like we feel the Earth's gravity, but we also experience the sun's gravity, and gravity runs, the whole solar system there, right? So, but gravity is also at work in very small interactions.
There's gravity between Robin and I right now, but it's not noticeable to us.
Yeah, gravity is not a very strong force. You have to have a pretty big body to exercise intense gravity. So the idea that I have is that actually the planetary cycles and the energy that each of the planets have is actually the same energy of the cycles that happen on Earth. So, a very simple illustration of this is the movement of the sun and then the seasons that we experience on Earth. So, even if we were very far away from Earth and we had no experience with actually what the seasons were like, we could still predict that the summer was going to start in a certain spot, or the winter was going to begin on X day, just by looking at the movements of the sun and the angle between the sun and the Earth. We could tell, for example, that we were going to have summer in the northern hemisphere and then like winter in the southern hemisphere.
It's actually kind of interesting. We spent a year on the Oregon coast, and the house that we were on was faced, the back of the house was facing due west. And the office that I worked in had this perfect view of watching the sunset every day. And for, months, a 6-month period, I saw the sunset move like this. As the seasons changed, where the sun came down was not in the same place every time. And you could really see the kind of, as it tilted away, it moved this way. As it tilted this way, it moved that way. And it really kind of gave me like I could literally see the effect of the rotation and tilt of the Earth by watching the changing position of the sunset every day. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. So the seasons are something we naturally experience on Earth, and we would experience them whether we watch the sun or not. But actually, one of the earliest uses of astrology back in the day was to predict like the end of winter. They started noticing, what are the points where the sun rises or sets and certain types of weather, so that they could figure out how long winter was going to last, or when was it time to plant. Yeah, exactly, right, Elizabeth? The moon rises in your yard and the position shifts over time. So early sky watchers were basically like, well, if we just hang out on Earth, we will experience the seasons. But if we actually start tracking the position of the sun, we can then predict the seasons, which is true of astrology energies. Astrology energies happen to you whether you predict them or not. But by tracking the positions of the planets, you can say, okay, in 2 weeks, you're going to experience this. Or, next month is going to be a great time for this activity, but a bad time for that one. So the idea is that somehow there are forces at work in our experience on this planet, which in fact are the very same forces that are at work as the planets shift around in our solar system as well. And so you can sort of experience life without tracking the planets, or you could track the planets to figure out what you're going to experience. But you're really sort of like you're experiencing the same thing. It's almost like you could read a book in print, or you could listen to the audio book, but you're going to be getting the same information either way, whichever way it comes in. Yeah. I had this realization that actually a clock is an astrological indicator, because it tells you about something about the position of the sun over the day by the vehicle of the hour. And so I'm like, maybe like our lives on Earth are sort of astrological indicators as well. So this is okay. So we've been talking about how that Earth energies resonate with energies of the planets because we all have these same sort of basic physical functions. Right? Oh, I see a question. Okay. The sunset changes dependent on the seasons. Oh my gosh, you have a planetarium next door? Oh man, Miriam says she has a planetarium next door with all the angles drawn out.
Nice.
So cool. I love that. Yeah, okay, so we have this idea. So the other thing is that if that is true, it actually will go both ways, right? Because on the one hand, you can track the astrological transit and predict what's happening. Oh, Griffith Observatory. Yeah, we went there when we were in Los Angeles. That was amazing. Great place.
I think we did. That was like Valentine's Day.
That's true. We had Valentine's Day at Griffith Observatory. Yeah.
And okay. I found out how much I would weigh on Jupiter. That was my takeaway.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So the other thing you can do, though, is you can also experience something that is happening to you on Earth, and then you can check the astrology to figure out what that is like. So, for example, I woke up the other day like in quite a bit of pain, and I was like, wow, why does this hurt so much? What is going on with me? Am I sick? Is something bad going on? And then I checked my astrology transits, and I'm like, oh, no, this is a Venus square. So that is not something that I need to worry about. Venus is not a planet. If it had been a Mars square or a Saturn square, I probably would have been really worried about that. But I'm like, oh, actually, it's Venus square my Mercury. And I'm like, does that have something to do with my communication? Maybe I should think about things a little bit differently here. So the idea that the planets and then our lives resonate at the same frequency or are sort of evidence of the same energy allows you to figure out what is going on, even when things are a little unclear. So, like, I don't know if you guys remember. I don't want to get into politics, but there was a presidential candidate last year who had sort of like a gunshot at a rally, and Steve woke me up to tell me about this, and I was like, oh, I bet that person had a Mars square that day. And we looked at the chart, and it turns out not only there was a Mars square, but it was a Mars square in the 10th house, which is the house of public appearances. And it happened outdoors at a rally. So there's this idea that actually when something happens on Earth, you can then check the astrology transits to understand what caused that and then figure out how you want to impact it. So I think it's pretty clear to us after our astrological journey of, the last 2.5 years, we've lived in all different places. We've been predicting what we're going to experience in a place and then going there, that there's absolutely something going on. There's some resonance or some harmonic or some causal theory. And my spirit guides told me I didn't have to provide a concrete answer about what it was because nobody's answered this debate in 2,000 years. But I feel like it would be great if we could all keep thinking about what it is and using our imaginations to figure out how it is that bodies that are so many millions of miles away can actually predict or help us get information about what we're doing here.
Well, and I would say too, like, let's not get so drawn into the how does it work argument that if we can't explain it, it must not work.
Okay.
Because that's a default for a lot of people. If I can't see it, I don't believe it. And it's like, look, we've seen it. I have spent this last year, so here we are in March, but going back to last July, I was in London, I was in Durango, Colorado, I was in San Francisco, California, I'm now in York. The person, the person that I am in these places changes with the place that I'm in. I am not exactly the same person I was in Durango. And it's obvious, it's especially obvious to Robin, and it's not like I'm purposefully doing it. I'm not intentionally being one way or the other. This is just locationally, in Durango, my Venus is hidden in the 12th house. When I'm in York, it's sitting in the fourth house, something like that.
You're talking about your Venus?
Yeah.
In York, it's in the 9th.
9th house. Oh, right.
House of astrology, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm counterclockwise, not clockwise. And I'm much more verbal here, and in Colorado, I'm much more kind of in my own head.
Yeah, that's part of why we went nomadic. So my spirit guides told us we needed to do this, and part of it is that we can really see how much we've changed depending on where we are. And I see Miriam saying that she's moved around a lot, and it really affects you differently. And until we figured out this astrological analysis, we had no way to predict that. We would just move someplace and then things were great, or we moved some other place and things were terrible and we couldn't figure out why. Part of the reason I got into astrology is that every time I moved to the West Coast, I ended up getting sick, and I couldn't figure out what was going on with that. It's pretty clear that something's going on, and it's hard to figure out exactly where. Thank you, Miriam. He's giving you props for being awesome. 27 years we've been married. I'll just say, yeah, okay. All right, so I wrote down. I've got this list of notes. This is a bus receipt on notes, and I realized we've missed one. We only have a few more minutes here.
Yes.
This is the magnetic field of the solar system, which is not something that I knew anything about. But this is a really good point. So Elizabeth was talking about how she read something about how an astronaut who was in space for a long time and then had to relearn how to do things when this astronaut got back onto Earth. And Ollie, we are going to be talking more about locational astrology on our Patreon, which is Spiritsaid, Spiritsaid, all one word. So yeah, we've got some more locational astrology lectures coming up on Patreon.
We are literally living experiment for it.
Yeah, we're experimenting on ourselves in the grand tradition of scientists who don't know what they're doing.
Like Marie Curie, hopefully, without the same results.
Yeah, without the radiation poisoning, right. Okay, so I didn't realize this until Steve mentioned it, but the solar system actually has a magnetic field, right? And the sun puts out a whole lot of magnetic radiation on a lot of different spectra. And then the planets all also create their own radiation, which has to do with the heating and flexing of their cores. And I discovered that actually the planet Jupiter puts out 2.5 times more solar radiation than it absorbs. So, and Saturn also does that. I think the Earth is about neutral. We absorb the same amount of solar radiation and radiate the rest back. So, but it turns out that there are actual physical forces in the solar system that do affect Earth. Now, a lot of that gets sort of like it doesn't all come into Earth because our atmosphere keeps some of it out. And then we also have our own electromagnetic field, which keeps some of it out.
Which is why we can have cell phones and satellites, because if it didn't, the solar radiation from solar flares would just make electronic equipment impossible on Earth.
Right, but it is true that sometimes there are solar flares that are very powerful and they do interfere with our satellites and electronic equipment. So it's pretty clear that there are energies from the solar system that are coming out onto Earth. And one of the interesting things is that the energy of the sun is different at like sunrise or sunset from how it is at noon. And we all know this because if you look up at noon, the sun will look super bright, but you can sort of look at it more easily if it's on the horizon, like it's sunset or sunrise. And you can also see a difference in color. The sun is more or less white at noon, but if you look at the sunset, it looks sort of yellowy or orangey. And this happens because the light is passing through the Earth's atmosphere. And at noon, it's just passing through the layer of atmosphere over the Earth. But at sunset, trying to get my hand right, it's passing through a thicker layer of atmosphere because it's coming in obliquely right at the edge. And what happens is that a lot of the light gets sort of like reflected out. Yeah, exactly. So all of the blue light gets reflected out by the atmosphere, and then what's left is the orange or the red or yellow light. So the point is that the sun's energy is different depending on what angle it's coming into the Earth at. So my theory is that perhaps the energy of the planets is also different depending on what angle it's coming in at. And the reason I say that is that one of the key points about astrology is that where the planet is in the sky at the moment of your birth makes a difference in how it affects you. So if Jupiter is at the top of the ecliptic, the sun's path, when you're born, it affects your career. If it's on the right side of the sun's path on the western horizon, it affects your relationships. If it's on the left side and the eastern side of the sun's path, it affects your identity and who you are. So one of the things we have to figure out, if we're going to discuss how astrology works, is not just what is the energy that affects us and how does it get here, but why does it affect us differently depending on the angle? And I will just say that there were a lot of reasons I was like, no, it doesn't affect us. No, it can't really be here. No, that doesn't make any sense. How does an object 500 million miles away affect us? My spirit guides were like, Robin, don't assume that just because it's far away, it doesn't affect you. And I'm like, well, but how does the angle work? It doesn't make sense if it's at this angle versus that angle. Why would that make any difference? And they were like, Robin, the difference of the sun the angle of the sun makes a difference, right? If it's noon, you don't want to go outside on a hot day, but then it's sunset and you're like, oh, let's go look at the sunset.
Well, we also we also talked about we were talking about this yesterday about angles, and we noted like angles make a big difference in things like car accidents. If you're in a car accident on a 120 degree angle with another car and you hit bumper to bumper, you're going to mess up your bumper. If that same car T-bones you at a 90 degree angle, that's a bad accident.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Angles matter.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things about astrology. So I read, when I first got into astrology, I read a couple, Elizabeth is saying, it's a good point. Good
Well,
point, Steve.
I don't know which one of us brought that up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, the
Together.
thing is, so I read this book back in the day when I first got into astrology. I read a couple of books at the University of Southern Oregon Library that were anti-astrology books, like objections to astrology. Because I'm like, if I'm going to get into this, I should know why people don't like it. I should be able to respond to that. And one of them was that the idea of angles was, it's a great T-shirt. Angles matter. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Right. So one of the objections was that our angles in astrology were sort of arbitrary. Like, well, why should a 120-degree angle be good where a 90-degree angle is bad? Like, the number 120 isn't a better number than the number 90. And a lot of these objections come from a lack of understanding of how astrology actually works. Because in astrology, when two signs are 120 degrees apart, they actually are the same element. So they flow together. They're both water signs or both air signs. When they're 90 degrees apart, that means that they are conflicting elements like fire and water or air and earth. So in astrology, there are reasons why 90 degrees is not such a good angle, but 120 degrees is a much better angle. So we were talking about that, and I was talking about how 120 degrees is naturally how people position themselves when they're having a conversation.
We actually saw this at the pub we were at yesterday. We took a field trip, and we had to duck into a pub because it started to rain. And across from us, there were two seats. They were empty, but there were two seats, and there was a table in between, and they're both like this, right? So that, like, they're not like at each other, and they're not like this, so they're like parallel to each other, but there's just a twist so that, it's like the people who set up the bar understood this is a good angle for conversing.
Yeah, they turned out to be exactly at 120 degrees, which in astrology is the best angle for planets to converse with each other, is 120 degrees. And here we were in this pub, and there were two chairs exactly angled at 120 degrees in this little conversational grouping. So I'm seeing a lot of things that people are saying in the chat about how angles matter, the trajectory of a bullet at a crime scene, right? Light diffraction is another example of angles, actually, the diffraction of light. And I feel like, we all, in understanding modern physics and in going through daily life, like, we all appreciate that. Like, if somebody meets you 180 degrees exactly across from you on the sidewalk, it's kind of aggressive, right? Or oppositional. But if they're coming more at an angle, you're like, oh, and you just like walk right by each other, right? Like, we all experience this. And I feel like astrology is sort of just this idea that physics and harmonics and angles affect us just on a much bigger scale. Like, why can't the physics and the harmonics of the planets affect us in the way that the physics and harmonics of interaction with other people affect us, or the angle of the sun affects us? So I don't think we've made any concrete progress in proving. I was like, I can't prove it, and Steve was like, don't worry, you don't have to prove it.
We can't. Some of this stuff, honestly, at minimum in our lifetime, won't be proved.
Yeah.
So it's fine.
Yeah. But maybe we could at least talk about the fact that instead of talking about how, well, we don't know how it works, or we have no idea, or it doesn't make any sense, right? Yes, exactly, right, Elizabeth? Some people's energy uplifts you and other people drains you. Like, we all understand that there are energetic effects that affect us on this planet. Instead of thinking, well, I don't understand how it works, or it doesn't make any sense, or science hasn't proven it yet. Somebody on one of my reels was like, what does astrology have to do with the real compounds and the real plants that are being studied? And I'm like, well, it's not unreal. It's just an aspect of physics or energy or harmonics or resonance that we haven't figured out yet. And that was, by the way, true for thousands of years about medicine and optics and gravity.
I would also wonder, does that mean that if you can't touch it, we shouldn't study it, like the impulse for humans to create art?
Right. Very true.
Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's going off.
Okay. So anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's been here with us. This is our first live stream, and we do plan to have these every other Sunday. And we've got locational astrology topics. We've got debunking astrological objections to astrology, which came up to me today. And if you go to our live tab on our channel. There's upcoming, the next live is 2 weeks from today, and you can click the notify buttons and you'll be able to get notified when that comes in. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's been here and put something into the chat and asked questions. And I'm so glad you liked it. I always have so many insecurities about what we're talking about. If there is a topic, by the way, that you're interested in seeing us debate live, activator versus indicator was today, definitely send us a message, go to our community page, leave a comment. You can also find us on Patreon at Spiritsaid, and then you can also go to our website, which is spiritsaid.com, and you can sign up for our mailing list. You'll be able to email us or send us something that you'd like to see us talk about. We really are interested in like bringing out more sort of like theoretical astrology discussions. My spirit guides are telling me that I need to talk more about my thoughts on the philosophy of astrology. And I'll just say I'm sort of terrified of this because I'm like, oh no, I'm supposed to like be concrete and be how to and be helpful. But they're like, no, you should talk more about why people care and why it's interested and how it might work and how it affects us and what it has to tell us about human nature and about how we live our lives on the planet. So anything you want to say before we wrap up here?
Yeah, well, thank you for coming and spending, I guess it's an hour.
I know, right?
The phone screen at this distance is a little small, but we've appreciated the chance to just share our different views on things, and we hope you enjoyed it. Hope there's some things you can take away to think about, and we hope you come join us again next time.
Oh, good. And I want to take a moment and thank my moderator, Elizabeth V. at The More Intuitive Me, for being here, for moderating the chat, for her support and helping me figure out how to go live at all. And if you haven't checked out any of the channels that are here, More Intuitive Me and then Ange at Roots and Waves, these are such great channels and wonderful people who've supported us and who are amazing in divination and tarot. And so I just urge you to check them out. And thank you to everybody who watches this today here and watches it on our replay. It means the world to us that you are interested in talking more about astrology. Yeah, okay, right. The philosophical Sagittarius and the Mercury Capricorn practical. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, well, this is our first live, but I guess it's just time to wrap this up. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who is here. We'll see you next Sunday. Bye-bye. Okay, what do I do? Oh, maybe X. Yeah, I want to stop streaming.